There was an interesting exchange that you had with Assemblyman Barlas and Assemblyman Rumpf before that, in which they asked you to commit to keeping the budget at $60.7 billion, no more. I don't believe you explicitly committed to that. And the chair astutely pointed out that you are one voice in this process, a big voice, but not the only voice. Will you or the governor ask the legislature, and specifically the majority, to not increase the budget past $60.7 billion?
The governor absolutely will be working with legislative leadership and with a goal of, again, finding ways to reduce costs in this budget as at the final stages as other spending inevitably some will get added. We understand that. There's
no specific directive to the legislature to hold at 60.7?
I mean, the directive was in her budget address at this point, but then she will absolutely have conversations with legislative leadership going forward.
Okay. I believe I heard my colleague ask the question if another $1 billion could be taken out of the surplus, which would take a $60.7 billion budget to a $61.7 billion budget. I'm afraid to ask this question. I mean, at what point does math take over? Is there a budget that is simply too big for this state to afford?
I mean, inevitably, one of the ways we're actually going to solve the structural deficit is going to be continuing to grow our revenues, continuing to build the economy. We also know, though, that we're going to have additional costs. Like, costs are going to, over the next several years, Medicaid growth is going to continue to drive some of our costs. Health benefits growth, we will have additional costs. To the extent we can find ways to reduce costs and balance that out, then hopefully we can not continue to have the growth that we saw over the last 8 years, because I will, again, remind everyone, the last 8 years, the annual growth was 6.8%. This budget growth is 1.6%. So I think the idea is to minimize growth. I'm not sure, given these cost drivers, particularly Medicaid is a huge one, I'm not sure we could guarantee a static budget as the solution for solving the structural deficit.
Okay, all right, thank you. Treasurer, the governor characterizes rolling back the alternative business calculation deduction as closing a corporate loophole. We had one of your predecessors here last month, former Treasurer Andrew Seidemann-Eristoff, who designed that deduction as it was enacted in 2011. And he testified that this characterization of the governor's directly contradicts its purpose, which was to align New Jersey's treatment of pass-through business income with every other state in the region. That, to me, is not a loophole. That is a best practice. By the administration's figures, which you shared today, this change would cost about 10,000 taxpayers an average of $12,000 each. It's around $120 million, roughly a fourth of the total tax increases in this budget. So my question, given that every neighboring state, in fact, I think all other 49 states, treat pass-through income more favorably, and also that your own revenue figures that I just stated confirm this falls overwhelmingly on small and medium-sized businesses rather than large corporations, and that using gross income as the threshold ignores actual business costs. What specific analysis did the administration conduct on New Jersey's competitive position before choosing these thresholds?
I'll have to get back to you with to see what analysis we have. I would say that our intent is to ensure that the alternate business calculation deduction is available for, we believe it's intended for smaller business, entrepreneurs, startups, and we want to ensure it's there for them. I believe 75% of the revenue will come from businesses over $1 million or the income over $1 million. But we'll get back to you with what we have for an analysis.
Okay, I thank you for that. So let me drill down on this a little bit more, and specifically two very important words: gross and net. And I'm going to use a real life example to better understand the governor's proposed changes here to the alternative business calculation deduction. We learned from testimony last month that the average independent family-owned gas station in New Jersey sells 1.2 million gallons of gas per year. That's the average. This is a small business sector that is very high volume, very thin margins. If you use last year's average gas price, which was around $3 a gallon, we know it's more today, they were bringing in last year around $3.6 million in gross revenue. 3.2 million of that went right back out the door to pay for the fuel that they were selling. Why would the governor tax gross revenue above the $1 million mark when the business never actually made the money? And I mean, you think of it this way, $3.6 million gross revenue less $3.2 million in expenses right off the bat leaves around $400,000 to cover labor, rent, mortgage, insurance, credit card fees, you name it. It's why a lot of gas stations in New Jersey are actually operating at a loss. What is the logic behind taxing a small business like a gas station on gross revenue when they net a fraction of that, if anything at all?
So I would say on this proposal, we're happy to work with you on, this has to be a piece of legislation. We're happy to work with you on concerns you have around any part of this as it goes through the legislative process.
Well, I really appreciate that because one of my concerns is that a small business like that literally won't have the cash flow to pay a tax bill. If they're netting, I mean, let's say that this gas station profited around $300,000. I think I'm being generous. I think that's high, but again, for the sake of the argument, if you're taxing them on the 3.6 million or 2.6 million after the $1 million mark, you're taxing that business as if it made 8 or 9 times the profit that it did. So I think we got to do better than that. I'm hearing an openness to try to fix this.
We're absolutely open to discussing this, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I have 2 more questions.
Assemblyman, I think that there's quite a few of us that it's really crazy to say $1 million today is not what we think $1 million is, right? Because of cost, period. So
Yeah.
I think that there's some possibility of some room there.
That's really great to hear. I appreciate it. Treasurer, I'm going to follow up on a exchange you had with Assemblyman Fryman regarding school funding. In your remarks, you said that let's see here. The budget includes a record $12.4 billion in K through 12 school aid, a more than $370 million increase from last fiscal year, and the highest total direct aid in state history. Although, as we are all aware, we are not getting the best bang for our buck on this investment. I am very glad you're aware of it. I want to know what you mean by it.
The governor has made it very clear she thinks we need to take a hard look at the school funding formula to ensure that the money is going to drive the best education for our children. And that's essentially what that comment means.
Does that mean is the formula working?
I think the formula needs to be improved. And I think
Needs to be improved. I'm glad to hear it. What concerns me is that you've touted a record investment in public education, but that record investment is going into a formula that you just conceded needs to be improved. So that doesn't feel like something to tout. I actually think it's a big problem to solve. Thank you for that. Yes, go ahead.
Assemblyman, go back to your question about the ABC calculation, or the adjustment. I think the words gross and net kind of get conflated in talking about the issue generally. So the calculation allows the taxpayer to net different categories of business income. For example, net profits from their business, rental, royalty income, partnership income, and S corporation income to determine the calculation, what we call the business increment. And then if you're a taxpayer with gross income, so all your income together of less than $500,000, you get to subtract 50% of that business increment from your gross income. And if you're in between a taxpayer with gross income between $500,000 and $1 million, you get to subtract 25% of that business increment.
Those are the changes that are being proposed here, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Thank you for that clarification. I think the 2 main points still stand. We're becoming less competitive as compared to other states, which was the intention of this original calculation. And just a philosophical point of view that I have, that we should not be taxing businesses on profits they never made. My last question for you is regarding federal funding. Federal funding cuts seem to be a big talking point. In fact, Governor Sherrill said multiple times in her budget speech, quote, that these are, quote, devastating cuts, recklessly slashing critical programs that are, quote, blowing an immediate hole in our budget, hurting New Jerseyans. But the budget you've shared that I have on my screen here, page 68, section C17, shows the opposite. Schedule 2 federal revenue in the budget shows that the federal government is increasing healthcare funding for Medicaid to New Jersey by more than $1 billion, housing by more than $22 million, kept food aid intact, increasing foster care funding by more than $20 million, increasing education funding by $25 million, et cetera. If you go by departments, the Department of Community Affairs, Education, Health, Human Services, Veterans Affairs, and Children and Families have all seen increases in federal funding this year. So you'll have to clarify the recklessly slashing programs in New Jersey. I see a total overall increase of $800 million in federal funding.
So most of the growth, as you mentioned, is in the Medicaid side. So based on enrollment trends, the home and community programs, expanding enrollment, and then our rate increases, which then have a federal match. Because the nature of the federal funding, though, we can't kind of shift from one bucket to the other. When we do have cuts, which we had in the SNAP administrative costs, we had in certain parts of Medicaid. So that actually is over $100 million that the state has had to fill in general fund dollars to fund. I would also add that there was another $700 million in proposed cuts that only through litigation were we able to actually restore those cuts. We also lost, when we look at federal dollars, and this isn't a direct federal cut, but it's an impact of the legislation. When you look at HR 1, that's where we lost CBT revenue, upwards of $500 million. We still have the impact of the Gateway Tunnel, which we're concerned about, but obviously it's not a cut yet. So there are buckets of cuts. While we still have Medicaid growth, which is driving this, we also are very concerned. This year we have $100 million. We had over $100 million we had to restore. Future years with these Medicaid cuts, we're very concerned about how that plays out.
Okay, so I appreciate that. I think how I see this is that net federal funding is increasing, but you are concerned about it being segmented in different buckets.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, because just to clarify, Assemblyman, for example, when it comes to Medicaid, because of the, for example, the having to re-enroll the twice a year, the check-in, for example, I've learned, let's just say if you're a disabled veteran, right, there's clauses, like it depends what your percentage of disability is, like how you were, so there's various factors that actually you can have more people lose Medicaid because of not having done the paperwork or not doing the paperwork. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So in essence, it looks like we're getting money, but there's actually other consequences as to how constituents can actually apply for the money, or if they will be entitled to the money, if that makes sense.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.